Often when people come into the Anglican Church, they ask, why do you call your priests Father? Doesn't Jesus forbid that? And what they're referring to is a passage in Matthew 23 where Jesus says this, "And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven." Well, that seems pretty straightforward. But the truth is we do use the term father, don't we? We talk about our biological fathers. We celebrate Father's Day. Jesus even tells parables in which people are calling people father. In the story of the prodigal son, for instance, when the father runs to meet the son has his speech rehearsed after returning home and having squandered all of his wealth. He comes home and says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you." And Jesus is telling this parable. So is Jesus forbidding the use of the term father as strictly as maybe we've been interpreting it? Well, let's keep reading for a moment. He goes on to say this, "Neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ." Some translations use the term teacher there, so neither be called teacher. So is Jesus forbidding us to use the term teacher, to have teachers? Even St. Paul says some are called to be teachers within the church. So what's going on in this passage? Well, what's happening is in Matthew 23, Jesus is confronting the scribes and Pharisees. These were the people who were supposed to have been Israel's spiritual fathers and teachers, and they have not been doing so. They have failed in their primary tasks. And so Jesus is warning them about this. The tradition of calling Christian priests father goes back at least to the 400s, and certainly by the 500s we see this well established as part of the Christian tradition. But it goes back even further in concept when you look at what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians. He says this in 1 Corinthians 4:15, "For though you have countless guides in Christ, you do not have many fathers. For I became your father in Christ Jesus through the gospel." So even St. Paul is describing his relationship with the Corinthians in terms of spiritual fatherhood. And that's what calling a priest father is really doing. It's calling to mind the understanding of spiritual fatherhood, just as it was with St. Paul and the Corinthians. It's also reminding the priest of the great call and responsibility that is upon his life to care for the flock that has been entrusted to him. So calling priest father is historically something the church has done. Biblically, we see the basic concepts of what was going on there. So I hope that you will be a little more comfortable doing so. One thing I want to point out, though, is that within Anglicanism, we don't address priests as pastor. That's not part of our Anglican tradition. It is part of, say, the Lutheran tradition or the non-denominational tradition, but pastoring is understood to be part of what a priest does, part of the priest's functioning, but it's not a proper title for a priest. So I hope this explains the idea of why we call priests father a little bit more. Have a blessed day.